Class, want to continue on with our Chapter 11 lecture and moving into slide 18. These are the guidelines for making complex sourcing decisions. These are things you need to take into consideration as you work through the case due on August the 9th. And you'll notice at the bottom, logistics managers, that's you. For this case, you're a manager for this battery operated toothbrush. Provide realistic assessments of total cost and performance implications. And the authors of the textbook have given us a list of general sourcing guidelines for use in decision making, and it seems like Apple does just the opposite on every one of these. But for CPG, consumer packaged goods, these tend to be the most relevant because not everybody like Apple can afford to air freight everything. So that's why here, if the product life cycle length is short, the idea is you make that in the US. But what's Apple do? They make everything overseas because they can afford to air freight. They're kind of the exception to this whole chart. Most products, particularly CPG, you can't afford the cost of air freight. You can't make any money if you're doing that. And the business case gives you all the arithmetic for that, as does another example that'll be coming up in a little bit on one of the slides. So if there is a lot of variation in offerings of the product, that's usually made in the US because both these two assume that US factories are more flexible than overseas, and that overseas you're also dealing with that 100-day inventory level because of the long performance cycle. And I don't want to go through these line by line by line. My God, you'll be listening to me for the rest of your life. So, here they are, and you can factor these in as items that you want to consider on the case. And here we go back. Here's our to be or not to be, to import or not. Remember that previous chart is a guideline. It's not etched in stone. Here's the disclaimer about Apple. They don't follow it because at Apple, obsolescence and air freight, they trump. Value is indicated on that other slide. So they're kind of the exception to the rule. Now, domestic sourcing versus importing. There's a slide coming up that I really enjoy and use in the class because that depicts the way that you need to do analysis to show a comparison of total lease landed costs for various options on sourcing. And in this instance, it's for plastic cups, China versus US. And I think you should be using, I suggest you use this format in the analyze part of the case. And that's where you'll list the cost categories in the first column and fill in the blanks with the costs for the options as you go across the top. And there are three. Here's the USA cost, the China cost by ocean, China cost by air. At the bottom, you can do a weighted average like what was done on the case for the battery operated toothbrushes to come up with a weighted average of these two differences. Now, these differences are not nearly wide enough because the China cost by air on freight is only 3x or so higher than cost by ocean. And in our case, we're using 15 times the cost difference between ocean and air, which is much more realistic. So I like the format of this chart. I don't like the arithmetic and all the line items that they put in. And here's some other costs that you may want to integrate into the case if you think they're significant and relevant to the decision-making process. Now, we talk about potential hidden costs, and here's a whole zillion reasons or whole zillion list of items that fall into hidden costs. But to me, there's one that can be mega bucks, and that's at the bottom. So you might want to think about how you can do an estimate of that cost and how large it would be on a sourcing decision, US versus China. So without further ado, let's segue into the case and talk about that. At the outset, we said we would. You need to use the information provided in the case, plus your own, quote, well-grounded assumptions to meet management's objective that's laid out in that case. And I'm not going to reiterate what that is. There's a target least landed cost that management is looking for. You can look back over these slides to help you come up with some options or an option that will meet management's goal. But again, you're going to need to identify and list your own reasonable cost estimates for your options. I couldn't very well put a case out and then tell you, oh, for this option, here are all the costs. That means you wouldn't have to do any thinking and there'd be no creative juices flowing from you. And we don't want that to happen. Now, at the very bottom, I indicate use DMAIC as your guide for working through the case. And I have on the second tab of the case kind of a very broad brush description of DMAIC. So I thought it was better to go over that in a little bit more detail here. DMAIC, used in Lean Six Sigma. D, first step, define the problem. When you do that, you don't need any more than 3 sentences to do that. M, measure via the data in the case, plus, here it is again, your, quote, well-grounded assumptions for costs. For things that are missing on your options, you come up with the costs. A, analyze. Compare the current model, those costs, to the sourcing options that you're considering. Very similar to the slide 22 that we just went over a little while ago, where I said I like the line items, but I don't like the arithmetic in all those line items. And can you come up with a lower cost model than what's presented to you in the case? I is improve. Look, that's your recommendation to meet or exceed management's objective. And last but not least, C is control. Those are the financial measurements that need to be tracked to make sure your recommendation is delivering the result that you predicted. So here you're going to need to list the measurements required for management to track the progress. And this is where I mixed up or changed the pace from the original syllabus to make a slight variation, because before I thought it would be appropriate to talk about the control measurements in this lecture, but I think it's much more important to get you into the meat of the slide, which was for everything that preceded this. And so the next lecture, which will be the final lecture, you don't get to hear my dulcet tones anymore through the web portal, but of course I'm always available by phone. So the next lecture, a week from now, I'll provide examples of financial control measurements, and that way you'll have the last piece for the C in DMAIC, and I'm hopeful that that will give you examples or ideas to use for the control portion in the case. So let's talk about the grading metric for the case. I'm basically going to divide this into 3 parts. 35% of the points, and it's totally worth 100 points in total. Did you follow the DMAIC steps? I've laid them out from D through C and what they entail, so I think that's straightforward. Is your recommendation, another 35% in the improve, supported by the measurements in the analysis? So as an example, and I know no one would ever do this, you can't recommend, well, I want to produce in the US because China sourcing is too hard. So you have to present a cost-driven decision to meet management's goal. How is that going to happen? And so that leaves 30% for what we'll call quality of the presentation and flow. Are you clearly identifying which section is D versus M versus A versus I versus C? So you need to clearly identify that when you turn in the work. Avoid typos, use spell check. I make my share of mistakes. I realize that, so you don't have to be perfect, but I don't want you to be sloppy either. So do your best to use spell check, and proper spelling does count, and you can admonish me on that, because I find from time to time I've got slides where I say, how the heck did I miss that? If you're going to work in a team, there's 5 members maximum, because I want to make sure beyond that, I don't know who's contributing what. So 5 is the upper limit. List the team members who worked on the case on the cover page. All team members are going to get the same grade. This isn't a situation where I can look at an oral presentation that you're doing and get a sense of a deeper level of work and understanding. If you're on a team and you all agreed that person A was going to do this and person B was going to do that, but you think person A didn't hold their end up, or person B didn't do what they were assigned to do, and it devolved on others in the group, you can email me and I will address it with that person, not divulging who said what. Well, not divulging who, but I'll divulge the what, and I'll speak in confidence. And I need to hear both sides of the story. I need to hear what the other person's side of the story is. Maybe the one casting the first stone is the guilty party. So let's hope that we don't have to get into that. Let's everybody do their fair share of work, and we'll be all one big, happy, dysfunctional supply chain group. As I've been saying throughout Chapter 11, the case is due August 9th, 9 p.m. That's a Sunday night. If it's a team turn-in, when you email it to me, copy all team members on the email. I don't think I want to post this in as a homework assignment in e-college. I'd rather you just email it to me. So you're going to have to remember, because e-college can be a pain in the neck to pull documents out of. I will grade the case on or before, here I put Wednesday, August 9th. I have August 9th on the brain. So whatever that following Wednesday is, I'll have it graded, and I'm not committing by noon like I did with the second exam. But that was good, because you guys got extra points out of it. So nothing wrong with that, I guess. But I'm not making that commitment. And again, it's not August 9th, it's whatever the following Wednesday is. So in summary, the purpose of the chapter is for you to understand and analyze the costs, trade-offs for importing versus domestic manufacturing or domestic sourcing. And the case reinforces these elements. So my favorite phrase, always work hard, whether you're studying for an exam or working on the case, and you should get started now if you haven't already. Now, the lowest case score I've ever given is an 85 out of 100. So I am not looking for perfection. I'm very lenient on this, but I do want to see a good effort by and some creativity out of the work that you do. Now, as I mentioned before, there's additional global slides that follow from here, but I don't believe they have any relevance to the case, and I'm not going to put them in the final exam. We're only going to test, I'm only going to use the items in the slides, and you know how I do it. Look at the agenda. That's how I get my exam question ideas. So if you know the agenda down, if you have that down pat, and you have the right concepts in mind for that, then you'll be fine. So there won't be any audio parts from me from this point on. So if you want to look at the rest of the textbook slides, you're welcome to, But with this, we are concluded, and thank you for your time and attention. And again, work hard on the case, get a little creative with it. I think I gave enough clues throughout the lecture on Chapter 11 to give you some ideas that you might come up with as options on how to lower costs for the battery operated toothbrushes. So good luck on that, and we will stay in touch. Thank you.